Now I believe we're turning over to panel one, bringing people out of exile, solidarity work for freedom. I'd like to turn it over to our first moderator, Ruby Moore.
Well, thank you, Frank, for that tribute. You know, there's a saying, only the good die young. And I think that many of us have come to an age in our work where we still think Tom died young in all the work. But thank you for that. Or there aren't words really to express that kind of body of work. Although I do want to say that we're here today in part to honor Judith Gran, and so we'll be attempting to do that again, honor that kind of body of work. She's a great leader and warrior and civil rights attorney in freeing people from exile and protecting and sustaining the rights of people with disabilities. We're also here to engage a diverse community of people in the substantive issues that people with disabilities are grappling with every single day, along with family and friends and advocates and allies, to be free and to have good lives. I appreciate Claudia's comments, really kind of elevating the fact that in all the conversations we're having, we're also doing it in the context of what could be characterized as a racist pandemic colliding with a global viral pandemic. And all of us having a heightened awareness of our vulnerabilities, but also the disproportionate impact on people who are in that intersection of poverty, disability, and you know, racist issues. So I just want to salute Claudia for bringing that back. I feel like we're having a conversation about bringing people out of exile at a time that it's particularly relevant because of COVID, when there's a growing understanding of the hazards of congregation and segregation, something that, you know, the TASH community and our friends and allies and, you know, everyone in the field who understands and listens to what people want. So there is this heightened awareness of the harms of segregation and congregation. And now knowing that over 40 to 50% of all the COVID deaths are happening in congregated settings, it makes our conversation about bringing people out of segregation, bringing people out of exile, that much more poignant. So, you know, many of us, including attorneys, advocates, self-advocates, have worked for over a half a century at least to end the harmful practices of segregation and institutionalization. And this panel that we're bringing together today, in true TASH fashion, advocates who've worked across generations, states, and systems to close institutions and support people with disabilities to return to the community and have good lives, is what we'll be discussing today. So I'm pleased to introduce you to our panel of distinguished experts. Regina Kline, who's a civil rights attorney, formerly of Brown, Levy, and Goldstein, and also previously of the United States Department of Justice. Chester Finn, self-advocate extraordinaire and individual and family advocate, who currently works for the New York State Office of People with Developmental Disabilities. And Dr. Jim Conroy, founder of the Center for Outcome Analysis, and Cal Montgomery, writer, survivor, and disability rights activist. So we have quite a lineup, and we'll start with Gina Kline. So Gina, with the recent passing of iconic leader and US Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we're all kind of reminded of her extraordinary contributions in the Olmstead decision. What would you say are the unique characteristics of unjustified and unnecessary institutionalization from an Olmsted perspective, and how has the law evolved to determine what the appropriate relief is to rectify the problem in a variety of settings where one goes to school, lives, where we work.
Thank you, Ruby. I should say too, as a warning to your audience, that when Ruby asks you to speak on a panel, you never say no. I should also provide the warning that I am merely legal filler for CLE requirements, that the other star power on this panel is really going to take this in wildly exciting ways as we've rehearsed. To answer your question, Ruby, I laid down the core requirements that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, writing the majority opinion in Olmsted, did in that landmark Supreme Court decision from 1999 that involved two women in a psychiatric institutionalized setting in Georgia, Lois Curtis and Elaine Wilson. The Olmsted decision emanates from a part of the ADA, Title II, which prohibits discrimination by public entities, state and local governments, in services, programs, and activities. The ADA had an integration regulation. It is essentially part of the original meaning of the statute is that services provided by public entities be provided in the most integrated setting appropriate to an individual's needs. The Olmsted decision made clear that the most integrated setting appropriate is, and so does the integration mandate, is one that enables an individual to interact with people without disabilities to the fullest extent possible. Now, you've asked me, how did the Olmsted decision sort of reasonably articulate what that means? And the holding of the decision in '99 was that Title II prohibits unjustified segregation of people with disabilities, period. And the question was, what exactly is the standard, or what is unjustified segregation? The holding was extensive and broad, and it required that community-based services be provided when those services are appropriate, when individuals do not oppose, and I think that's the most elegant phrase in the decision that was offered by Ginsburg, when individuals do not oppose receiving community-based services, and when those community-based services can be reasonably accommodated, taking into account, of course, the resources of the public entity. Now, that's what happened in '99 in Ginsburg's landmark decision. Advocates called this the Brown v. Board of Education for people with disabilities, rightfully so. And Olmsted was not limited to quite simply state-run facilities. It also extends to all those facilities that are covered by state and local governments and the administration of their systems. And so your questions about what exactly does it mean in the context of Olmsted, the decision and holding involved a set of facts with two individuals in where they lived in residential facilities. In the years since the 1999 Olmsted decision, there's been enforcement in a number of different contexts since the original enforcement in residential settings. It has extended to enforcement of the Olmsted decision, not just where people live, but where they work and where they go to school. In particular, in successive years, and I'm well aware, looking at the chat box, that we have lawyers that have worked with us, Ruby, and many others on this case, Lane v. Kitzhaber, Lane v. Brown. I saw Max Labertosa and Eve Hill and Lynn Rucker. In 2012, a federal district court in Oregon found in Lane v. Kitzhaber that the ADA and Olmsted applies to government employment services, an employment service system. And it was rejected, the federal court rejected the argument that the 1999 Supreme Court decision should be so limited to just residential services. And so the original holding of Olmsted was found to apply more extensively than just residential settings, but into where people work. Ruby asked me to go through an example of this Lane v. Kitzhaber, later renamed Lane v. Brown decision, and I'm happy to give some background on that. But in general, in the successive years, even as recently as March 2020, a federal court denied the state of Georgia's motion to dismiss on an Olmstead case, in the GNETS case, applying Olmstead to education in a system of separate behavioral schools in which students with disabilities were provided separate and unequal educations. And so you could see that there has been this robust and really vibrant enforcement of Olmstead in recent years. And it has led to very significant decisions that have reasonably articulated that Olmstead applies to all of the domains of people's lives, where they live, where they work, where they recreate. And it is truly in keeping with the original assumption that this was the Brown versus the Board of Education, the disability rights movement. Just by way of the numbers, let's talk about Lane v. Brown for a second. In that case, there was an understanding that the state of Oregon violated the ADA and Olmstead by failing to serve a class of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the most integrated settings appropriate. But this is what that meant. At least 61% of people at the beginning of the lawsuit, over 60 to 65% of the people were receiving vocational services in segregated institutional settings. At that time, there were less than 16% that were receiving services in the community. There was an unjustified and unnecessary reliance on segregated settings to receive community-based services. And the Lane relief, the landmark settlement agreement that ensued, supported employment services in typical jobs in the community for over 1,000 working age adults and over 4,900 students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. These consent decrees, in particular the Lane decision and ensuing consent decree, defined what community-based services were in the way of an employment system that had historically only relied on segregation. And so I'm turning it back to you, Ruby, because I've given, as you've asked, I've given the legal predicate, and I want to see what you're going to do with it.
Well, as you know, Gina, as we all know, these cases, we need the brilliant legal scholars to help us frame them out and to use the legal tool as a lever. And it just isn't possible to actually implement all those great ideas in those settlement agreements without those civil rights advocates and activists, self-advocates, family members, and community folks. So with that, I'm going to turn to Chester Finn. So Chester, you've been working for decades through Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, the national self-advocacy organization, and now through your job with the state of New York to close institutions. And can you talk a little bit about that, and also talk about, I think Gina sort of provoked this question, but whether the ADA cases are only about places where people are or fully including people in community life?
Yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to everyone that's participating today. I was a little worried because I was on mute and I didn't think I was going to get off. So somebody came on and said, "You're unmuted." You know, I think the next step in advocating for stuff is technology for people that are blind and visually impaired, because we go through a lot trying to think whether we're going to participate in something, and everybody else is like, "Oh, you can do this, you just do this, you do that." But if you have technology that's telling you something different, it's different. But I'm here. So yes, I think we talk about institutions, and getting people out of institutions, and we fought to make that happen. But I think that we have a greater fight today. I just received a call this morning from an individual. He was so upset. He said he was going to move out of the country. I said, well, you need money to do that. And he was upset because all of the restrictions and things that, you know, his agency has around COVID, and he couldn't even get food. So, you know, I gave him some advice, you know, to get in touch with his care manager, which we have in our state to help individuals. But I think we're putting people, we stress independence and we stress getting out of institutions, but we never think about the places that we're putting people in and putting rules around them that are institutionalized. And this is me speaking, so if it's anyone listening from my work, I'm going to tell you this, where you meet me on the street or in the supermarket or not. I think we're enslaving people by their past records, and we're enslaving people because of behavioral plans. You know, I work with people every day. I worked with an individual yesterday, and we were trying to figure out how to support him in his house, and the question kept coming up, well, you can't go out. You have medical needs and things too. You know, I have medical needs. I mean, I'm a diabetic, and if someone tells me I can't have a piece of cake, they better be across the table like 6 feet, social distancing, because my fists don't think about social distancing when you tell me I can't have that cake. But it's choices and giving people the right to be able to make those kind of decisions. And we don't think about that. We think about, we're doing things right for people, so we're going to put them in group homes or other places, and we're protecting them from themselves. It's like, I grew up with a family. My family protected me to a certain extent, and then they knew that I had to make it on my own in the world because they wasn't always going to be there. Fortunately, my mother's still alive, and she lives in Atlanta. I wish I could get her away from there, but that's another story within itself. But, you know, we don't pay enough attention to individuals and what we do and what we make for people. And we figure, oh, well, people have houses, and these agencies are doing the best, and the community's doing the best. We have nursing homes. We have places that we've created for people, but we never asked the people if that's what they wanted, if they wanted to be there. And another thing that's holding people back, and it's all over the country and around the world, is these waiting lists. We talk about person-centered planning and building things around person, but when it comes down to it, we forgot it. We forgot how to support people in the way that they want to be supported. I know that, you know, today we're going to talk about things, and I'm so glad for attorneys, you know, that are here and participating. And I was so glad to, you know, to be able to meet Judy Grant. You know, when Tia first told me about who she was and what she did, I was doing a little dance because I was happy. I can't wait to meet her. You know, I got to meet her and, you know, work with some of the things that they put in place. And I got a chance to go with Tom Gill to Thailand and Japan. And that was great. But I think we have to continue to do our parts and push the issues with our legislators, with our local people, with our agencies, and with our states. And don't let anyone off the hook, because people's lives depend on it. I don't want to have to talk to an individual and tell them, well, someone has to help you with your food. It should be independent. And I thank you guys for inviting me. And I'm going to do everything I can to advocate for people as long as I can. Thank you.
Chester, thank you so much. I know your work, I know your heart, I know your place in the movement and your extraordinary and unrelenting advocacy to help people to just have freedom and dignity and respect. So thank you so much. So now we'll turn to Dr. Jim Conroy. Jim, my longstanding fellow traveler in all these cases to close these institutions. What do you want to say about how we use data to develop effective remedies in these cases and to really have a positive impact on people's lives?
Thank you, Ruby, and thanks everyone for letting me be part of honoring my friend and colleague of 38 years. Judy, we met in 1982, and our partnership has been what I want to talk about, social science and the law. This can change the world because we've been through it. I want to trace what Judy has done, which has helped change the world. And we began at Temple University in Philadelphia when Judy came in 1982 as a law student. And as happened to me, we immediately fell in with a very bad crowd. Angry, indignant, brilliant attorneys at the Public Interest Law Center. And from then on, we just went from one freedom to another. Pennhurst was the case that we began on. I took the role of following all the people out of Pennhurst, and some of them are still being followed, every person every year. But we found out from Pennhurst, 1,200 people leaving an institution, that their lives were immensely enriched in every way we knew how to measure. That was the first, and we've done several things together on that. Now that gave rise to what Frank Lassie calls a roadshow for attorneys, traveling around the country, showing other attorneys in other states how to mount a Pennhurst-like litigation. Many of our heroes were with us, like Eleanor Elkin. Soon after that, 1986, New Hampshire became the first state to be institution-free when Laconia State School closed. In the meantime, Connecticut was mounting a lawsuit, and Judy was deeply involved with that, with Frank Lasky and David Shaw and many of the usual suspects. But it just went so excitingly from state to state. Connecticut, Mansfield closed in 1993. The next was Oklahoma, in which the most advanced order of its time was handed down. And I followed the people. Gee, at times I was following 3,700 people in Oklahoma who were either in institutions or in community or moving from one to the other. Oklahoma had the best order. Judy was right at the heart of that. And it allowed people to go to supported living, choosing the place where they lived and who they lived with, and sometimes their staff. It was an advanced order. And year after year after year, we got the best scientific outcomes and quality of life from Oklahoma that we had ever seen because it was done the best. Oklahoma moved on to New Mexico, where Judy had me on the stand for many hours. Actually, Judy is fond of quoting the mention of Nicholas Romeo. Romeo versus Youngberg was a case about right to treatment and many things, but Nicholas Romeo was a great tale to tell to a judge because he was one of the people everyone knew, from judge to jury to advocate. Everybody knew Nicky could never live in the community. He just couldn't handle it. And on that stand, I was asked by Judy, what happened to Nick Romeo? They wouldn't let me answer, and quite a fight. In the end, I said, oh, well, Nicholas has been in the community for 15 years with loving folks and shared living, and he hasn't had any kind of behavioral outburst in all that time. He's doing great. The impossible people. That's when social science and the law come together again. In Tennessee, the first case in which the plaintiffs were self-advocates. What a breakthrough. And now in Arlington closed in 2010, Clover Bottom closed in 2015, I believe. All in all, just the cases I've mentioned, there were 4,500 lives just in those cases that Judy influenced so directly. And I want to say, I know Judy would want me to say, together our fantastic colleagues, Tom Gilhol, Frank Lasky, Barbara Ransom, and the witnesses in all the cases, the attorneys in other states, David Shaw, Jack Derryberry, so many others, the witnesses like Alan Crocker, Lynn Ruckers, Lou Brown, Sue Gant, Alan Bergman. These are stars and luminaries, but all of it is about, if we've seen farther than others, it's because we stood on the shoulders of giants. And with that, I'd like to, well, you know what? I want to show a graph, if you're ready to see a graph that I think tells the story of what Judy's life has done. On the left is green, the number of people, American citizens, who lived in public institutions over the years from 1952 all the way up to now. See how the graph goes up and up and up. It goes up to almost 200,000 people. And as it goes down and down on the right, that's when Judy Grahn was litigating in all these cases in all these states. You had a big part in this, and it's noble. On the right, in red, is something that happened in my generation, the growth of community services, which has exploded to the point at which we begin to realize our dream that no one in the future will have to grow up segregated, isolated, and demeaned. So a tribute to you and all of our colleagues. Judy, thanks for letting me speak.
Thanks, Jim. That was great. That was a little trip down memory lane over, like 24 class actions in 19 states. Thank you for that. But also bringing forward, I mean, honestly, one of Judy's great gifts was supporting self-advocates to testify as expert witnesses, and not to diminish lived experience, but that people had the lived experience and the wisdom and the understanding of what was needed and the understanding of what the remedies needed to be and the clarity to say some of the stuff you think is going to work doesn't make any sense to any of us who are going to be like subjected to it. So thank you for that, Jim. We've always benefited from having the data. I've had some of our best data wonks, our best researchers, send me information saying, I know you're going to read this and say, duh, we already know this. But it turns out that having those authoritative resources allows us to propel things that self-advocates would tell you, yeah, so what? Yeah, we've known that forever. But it turns out in the litigation context that it's extraordinarily important to have that information. So thank you for that. So as we go forward, Cal Montgomery. Cal is another rock star, and I just want to thank you, Cal, for the extraordinary efforts that you made to just be here today. I'm not going to disclose where you're presenting from unless you feel like you want to, but I'll just say the question I'd like to throw at you on the heels of what Chester and Gina and Jim have said is, how do we know that everybody can benefit from independent living? In a TASH community, it seems like a question that's already settled, but we also know that there are active proponents of keeping people in segregation who are using the concept of choice to power up the countervailing force, if you will. So anything you want to say about that would be great. Hopefully Cal's here.
Cal just needs to take a minute to unmute his telephone.
Okay.
But he has assured me he's on top of it.
I know that Cal is on top of it, and if he says he's on top of it, he's on top of it. I just want to make sure the tech is working in rather extraordinary circumstances. Okay, so Cal, I'm going to reserve time for you as the cleanup hitter, and you can say anything you want. because you're the cleanup hitter. I'm just going to post.
There we go.
You're here.
Sorry, I'm going to mute it. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thank
I
you.
apologize. It's a little chaotic. I'm in a hospital right now, but I should have this. So thank you, Ruby, so much for this question. So Dennis, a lot of what I was planning to say, Chester already got. So there's going to be a little bit of spontaneity here. There should be a slide going up right now, which, because phone or video chat is not accessible to me, I asked the really talented artist, Vince Orem, to prepare for us today. And I'm going to describe that slide to you for a minute. It's a picture of blackline drawing of 5 cases of self-advocates. From left to right, we have Roland Johnson, who is a Black man, and he is speaking and gesturing. This is, I believe, a picture based on a keynote speech that he once gave called Who's in Charge or Who's in Control. The next one over is Ray Loomis. And you may not know Ray. He worked for a very short period of time. He's a white appearing man, and in this picture, he's looking rather tenderly down because it's based on a photograph of him with his son, Billy. Next to Ray is Ivanova Smith, who is a young person working today of Eastern European descent, and Ivanova is staring straight at us with glasses on, looks ready to speak. The next one over is Bernard Carabello. Bernard, I'm sure all of you are well familiar with him. He was one of the faces of the Willowbrook folks, and he has had a long and distinguished career. He's a Latinx man who, with cerebral palsy. I believe he's the only one in this group that does not have an intellectual disability. And he is either smiling or laughing, and he looks like about the most friendly person I have ever met. And the next to him is Bo Sorensky. I'm sure needs no introduction, who is a Black woman with an enormous smile. Right? And I asked for this particular graphic, specifically because I want to focus on something that a lot of us don't always focus on, which is the theoretical understanding of institutionalization that comes out of people with intellectual disabilities. And we very often don't listen to these people, and we don't think of them as theorizers. But the reality is that every single human being has some model in their head of how the world works, and that's called theory. Some of us, for creating really fancy words, if you were educated at, say, Harvard University, you probably have a lot of big words to explain the theories of how the world works. If you were educated at Pennhurst or Willowbrook, you're probably going to express it very differently, but you still have that. And a lot of the times we are listening to white people in wheelchairs about theories of institutionalization, and they have something important to say, but they don't have everything important to say. So a little bit about my background. I finished college, was ready to go to graduate school, and then through a minor detour, my post-baccalaureate education began with 4.5 years of long-term institutionalization, which was intended to be for the rest of my life. I was in psychiatric facilities, and one of the reasons that I stayed so long and was supposed to be there forever is that if you put me in the right circumstances, I'm that person who spends as much of their time as possible whacking their head against the wall as hard as they can. So, you know, we went through the whole helmet and the behavioral stuff and whatever. Once I got out, which was pure accident, and was able to direct my own life to a much greater extent, I don't do that now. I don't need to do that now. The quality of supports that we give people has a lot to do with who we think they are. It's not just that who we think they are determines the supports, but the supports determine who we think they are, or the lack thereof. After I got out, I worked because this was the job that I could get. I worked for a while in the developmental disability system in group homes, working with people with severe and profound intellectual disabilities, supporting them. And then much more recently, as my physical disability has developed, I have spent short-term time in nursing facilities. So I have experience of the 3 big systems, and I've experienced in different roles in the system. So a lot of what I do, I was hoping to be a philosophy professor. So I've been asking myself questions like, what is an institution? And for the most part, when we think of institutions, we think of great big facilities that are some distance from everybody else in society. And that's historically true. But while many of the white people in wheelchairs that have gotten out of their institutions have been able to have self-determining lives in the community, as Chester has pointed out, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities often have very different experiences. And so while we've often focused on people moving into smaller groups from state operated developmental centers to ICFs to group homes. And we were focused on people moving nearer to non-disabled neighbors and on the features of their lives, the houses, the time of day, the things they do during the day, looking more like their new neighbors. We're often missing a really big piece of this, which is control. Okay, so I want to look, and if you want to follow up on this, I would recommend, by the way, Roland Johnson's excellent memoir, Lost in the Desert World, which is available online for free, or you could buy it used as a book. But these thinkers, and I can trace it back as far as 1976, the documentary People First. But it's mostly an oral tradition, so it's kind of hard to dig some of it out, although Roland has done an excellent job of making this available in text form for us. People are talking about, sure, it's better to be in a small group home than a great big institution, but we're basically institutionalized. We're still basically institutionalized because there are all these rules and regulations we have to take. And as we think about COVID, this has been especially bad. There are many people in group homes today who are, quote, in the community, unquote, who are getting locked in their rooms for like weeks at a time because somebody else in their house has been infected. People are not being permitted to leave or to have visitors come in. They're not having, all kinds of freedoms are being restricted. And you can do that because they are institutionalized. So what do I mean by institutionalization? I'm not talking about how many people you live with that you didn't choose to live with. And I'm not talking about how far you live from your neighbors. And I'm not even talking about whether the surface features of your life look like your neighbors. I'm talking about what Ivanova has very typically said, that institutionalization is administrative control over people's lives. I'm going to repeat that because it's the most beautiful formulation I've ever heard. The institutionalization is administrative control over people's lives. And you see this in both the verbally expressed theory that comes out of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, although this was led by people with intellectual disabilities. People with other forms of developmental disabilities sort of piled on later. And we see this in the whole tradition, and we see this in the behavior of people who do not have complex communication systems. That the more you are controlled by other people, the worse your life gets. The more you have freedom to self-determine and the supports to do that, because many of us do need these supports, right? If you do not have a way to express yourself in language, then you need, for example, people who are familiar with this communication and can interpret, this is what this person likes, this is what this person doesn't like. They know you well enough to know what you like and what you don't like, and to help enforce the choices that you are making that you're having a hard time expressing in traditional terms. One of the questions we get asked a lot now is, are there some people who are really too disabled for the community or too disabled for rights, basically? Are there people who are too disabled for rights? And I think this is the wrong question, because if there are rights, there are for everybody, right? There's no such thing as do anything for rights, because rights are for everybody. If they're only for some people, there's less privileges. And you get privileges in an institution, but in the real world, you get rights. Somebody's trying to phone me now. Okay, sorry about that. So instead of thinking about how is somebody too disabled for rights, we need to start thinking about what those rights would look like, right? What would they look like? And as I've looked across the whole spectrum of people with disabilities, they seem to come down to things like the ability to define yourself, the ability to make your own choices, the ability to, I apologize, I'm kind of blanking here, but and these are the basic rights, but to define yourself, to make your own choices, to have the supports that you need, to have integration. And speaking of integration doesn't mean near people. It means being in relationship with people. And very often when we put people, quote, in the community, they're still not making friends. They're still not having relationships with their neighbors. They may see their neighbors every day, but we're not supporting them. Part of that is because we use pooled staff. We use that 4 people may have 1 or 2 staff. Or I've worked in a place where 7 people have 3 staff. And it is really hard to make even go to do the things that you want to do on a regular basis if 4 of your roommates that are completely different from you, we have to tag along every single time. It's very hard to make new friends when you're in a group of 10 people every single time you meet somebody. This is hard. And so while we have made people's lives better in many respects, I think we need to listen to the people who have experienced this form of institutionalization and who are coming out of these places and to what they think institutionalization is, what they think integration is. And we need to respect people who are very different from anybody with a law degree, to be perfectly frank. Very different. As theorists, as thinkers, and people have something important to say. And also, again, pretty much everybody in this meeting, I'm pretty sure, works with the coal thing. So we think a lot about what's achievable. What do we have what precedents do we have and what can we build on? But we also need to keep in mind where the hell are we trying to get to? Even if we can't get all the way, how far can we get, right? Because it's not enough to just give us the surface features of freedom so that we look like we have freedom to outsiders. It's really important to give those of us who are at risk of institutionalization or who have been institutionalized or who are institutionalized now the kind of freedoms and supports and choices. I remember one of the co-founders of People First of Canada was talking about what it was like to get that first apartment. And he said, now I can decide whether or not to make my bed. And I think I want to focus on that for just a quick second, because a lot of us, when we think about normalization, we want people with disabilities to do what everybody else is doing. And what happens is people get forced to make the same choices as everybody else is making. But the really important thing isn't if the bed is made or if the bed is not made. The really important thing is who decides if the bed is made or not. And if your staff person decided if the bed is made, then you're not free. It's got to be you. It doesn't matter if the bed's made or not made. It matters who decided if the bed's made or not made. And we offer such meaningless choices to so many people. I remember when I was working in group homes, I once got really frustrated. I decided to document what quote choice unquote looked like. And so I would write things in the logs like, Amelia was woken up at such and such a time. She was offered a choice between the red shirt and the green shirt, and she picked the red shirt. She was offered a choice of cereal or no cereal, or cereal with milk or cereal without milk, and she picked with milk. She did not want to go to work, but I explained that there's no staff at the house and she has to go to work. She was offered a chance to put on her coat before the van came or when the van came. And I actually, unfortunately, got an award for how amazing I was at documenting all the many choices that people have in their lives. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the people who were living in that program were concerned, they were not being offered meaningful choices. If you want to call out sick, you can call out sick. You don't have to ask yourself, well, does my house manager feel like finding somebody to come to my house and stay with me today? Or can I prove that I'm sick enough to warrant that level of work from my house manager? And I think we really need to be listening. One of the most important things to me of this last year has been that a guy named Brad got an obituary in a short time. And Brad comes from the physical disability part of the movement. He is best known for the Section 504 demonstrations. He helped make sure that everybody had a hot meal every day. And he did that by getting the Black Panthers to supply those hot meals. And that's what we make you remember him for. What we don't remember him for was for his amazing work, which is just incredible, in trying to infuse the ideas and the insights of the Black Panthers and the ideas and the insights of the white people who were founding the independent living movement. We didn't get too far, and this is partly because people on both sides were a little bit reluctant to support these ideas merging together. But I spent a lot of time this year, and Claudia reminded me of this in her original presentation. I spent a lot of time this year asking myself, Brad Lomax was a respected leader of the early independent living movement, and most of us have never heard his name. And if we have heard his name, we think of him as basically the precursor to Clubhouse, which was a contribution, but it was not nearly his most important contribution. If we honored Brad Lomax the way we honor some of the other leaders, including Judy Heumann and Ed Roberts, certainly deserve to be honored and respected for their contributions to our movement. But if we had taken the legacy of Brad Lomax seriously for the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, how much better a position would we have been in to cope with the events of 2020 today? I see so many people today trying to do the work that Brad Lomax was doing 50 years ago. And if only we had allowed that work to take root. And so as I look at another group of people who is frequently ignored within our movement, and who are frequently their contributions are downplayed, which is people with intellectual disabilities, I think how much we are missing by not, again, centering a really broad and diverse group of disabled people. Many of the people we listen to on disability look like the people on disability, and right now they don't. I have been told my whole adult career in the disability movement that I am, quote, too diverse for the disability rights movement. And just so you know what that means, I'm a white person in a wheelchair who's also autistic. And I have an intellectual disability diagnosis, but since I didn't get it in class, I got into MIT, like nobody ever treats me that way.
Hey, Cal?
Yes, you want me to stop, right?
No, I never want you to stop.
Okay.
I've already invited you to Georgia for like 2 days to just like share wisdom with everybody I know. We've got about 5 minutes, so we probably have one question more that we could ask, and I'd like to throw it out to the panel, and whoever feels so moved, you know, just give me an indication that this has your name on it. Although I do kind of want to say if Cal or Chester wants to swing away, that might be like the thing to do here. So how might we predict where this whole push for community integration might go as society changes and systems change, or sorry to say, don't change?
This is Chester. I think that how we can do that is integrate more us with intellectual developmental disabilities in part of making the decisions. I've worked for 23 years trying to get my state and other agencies to incorporate what people know and their abilities that they have, exercising who they are and what they can contribute, and not trying to make them fit into the boxes that they want. We always talk about think outside of the box. When we don't think outside of the box, we think outside of the box that we want to put people in the boxes that we create, but not the ideas of what people have. And I think that this will change as we get more involved, and it comes to a point where we have to demand our rights. We got to stop asking for, oh, please, can we do this? Please, it reminds me back to the days of the civil, rights, where people were afraid to speak up, and then it came to a point where people say, we're not going to take this anymore. We're going to ask, and we're going to demand for our rights. So we have to do the same thing. It's all these barriers keeping us from being who we are. We just got to speak for ourselves. It says speak, use our voices.
Thanks, Chet. So I got the 2-minute warning, but Cal, I already told you this. You're the cleanup hitter. So if you want to swing away for 2 more minutes, you can. If you want to cede that time to someone else, that's okay too.
Cal, this is Lydia. We're having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. Is it better?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. As we get better with positive and alternative communication, we are finding that more people have more things to say than we ever imagined. And the reality is that those of us who are talking now, we don't know that the people who haven't yet had a chance to speak up are going to say, because that's what communication is. It's new information. We have no idea what it's going, and that's the best part.
Cal, this is Lydia. We actually weren't able to hear most of what you said. You were were speaking but missed the comment.
I'm going to try again. As we learn more about augmentative and alternative communication, we are finding that more people are saying more things than we ever imagined possible. And the point is, we don't know what the people who haven't yet had a chance at the mic are going to say, and those are the people who are going to lead us into the future. So I don't know what the future is going to look like, and that's the important part, that it's going to be something we don't even imagine yet, because new people are going to come and pick up the mic and lead us into the future.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all the panelists, and I like that we ended on the point of saying that if you're listening to people who don't speak or who are not being heard, that might be the most important thing to train into when we're thinking about the next steps. What are people trying to tell us that we're not hearing yet? So with that, thank you, panel one, and we'll move on with the rest of the symposium.